A Life After April, Chapter 6, A Voice No Longer There. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. I quit nursing school and never looked back. At least, that's what I told myself. The truth was less certain. There were nights I lay awake tracing the shape of an abandoned future, wondering if I had stepped off a path or if the path had disappeared beneath my feet. I did not return to university, did not collect degrees, did not sit in lecture halls listening to professors talk about futures I no longer saw for myself. Instead, I worked. I moved forward in the way that people do when they cannot afford to stop, taking only the knowledge I needed to know to navigate the profession I fell into, the one that became my shape. I told myself it was enough. Sometimes it even felt like the truth. I was at London Life for 36 years. A name that implied permanence, something anchored, something that wouldn't dissolve under the weight of time. I started there as a calculator, back when calculations were human. I watched numbers climb and collapse, commissions paid out in careful increments, brokers living and dying by percentages, by fractions of fractions. The job became muscle memory, a routine. Log in, compute, adjust, approve. It was not love, but it was security, and security was close enough to love. I became a specialist, then a senior one. I understood how money moved, how it shaped lives, how it could slip through your fingers as if it had never belonged to you at all. I retired at 55, not because I wanted to, but because love, in its quiet and insistent way, pulled me toward another life. I had built my own foundation, one secured through years of numbers and calculations where my worth was measured in work, in expertise, in the silent power of financial independence. And yet, I left it behind. I packed up my pension and what was left of my faith in systems and moved to America. For love, for a man with a failing heart, for the promise of something softer than security. But love, like currency, has an exchange rate. What I gained in companionship, I lost in autonomy. What I traded in certainty, I received in obligation. I did not realize at first how love could require such surrender, that it could ask for pieces of you until one day you wake up and cannot recognize the outline of your own life. At first, I told myself it was choice, that I had stepped willingly into this new life, into the caretaking, into the slow erosion of self in the name of devotion. But belief does not sustain a body. I had spent my life proving my worth through work, and love, it seemed, was no different. I took the hit. You take the hit when you believe in the kind of love that bends the rules of logic. In the States, the law says a wife is entitled to a portion of her husband's pension, a quiet acknowledgement that love is, among other things, an economic arrangement. He didn't like it, but he took most of what I had from my first husband, so maybe we were even in some cosmic ledger. Money moves through a marriage like water. Sometimes it nourishes, sometimes it erodes. Love, too, moves like this, shifting, reshaping, wearing things down so slowly you do not notice until something essential is gone. I did not see it at first, the way I had begun dissolving inside the roles I had taken on, the way I had let myself be carved into something smaller, more manageable, easier to carry. I was good to Tom, in all the ways that mattered, in the ways that left me empty. I had been accustomed to earning my place through work, through proving my worth, and love was no different. But love, I was beginning to understand, was not a salary, not a reward for labor. It was something given freely or not at all. And yet, I had spent years treating it as an equation, to be balanced, believing that if I poured enough of myself into it, it would hold me in return. But presence is not possession. And over time, I wondered if love was meant to be another thing I labored for, if devotion should require so much surrender. Caregiving is a kind of erasure. It is the quiet subtraction of self in service to another, the steady depletion of one's own needs in order to tend to the body of someone else. Sometimes his heart forgets its rhythm, needs to be shocked back into place. I wonder if love works the same way, if there is a way to bring it back when it stumbles, a jolt to set it right again. When his heart failed him, I was there. When his breath came in stutters, I was there. When the hospital lights flickered against the ceiling and the sound of the machines rose and fell, I was there. But when I reached for something beyond the role of caretaker, there was nothing left to hold me. Love had always been something I worked for, something I proved through the weight of my hands on his tired body, through the steadiness of my presence. And yet, I had begun to wonder if love should require so much surrender, if I was still myself, or only the sum of what I gave away. In our home, love was measured in quiet acts of service, rolling compression socks over swollen ankles, warm water, hands pressing into tired flesh, refilling pill bottles, steadying his breath when it faltered in the dark. It was an exchange, though an unspoken one, where care was given and presence was the only currency. The first time I visited Tom's house, I noticed the walls were bare. Not in a minimalist, intentional way, but in the way of someone who had lived in a place too long and stopped seeing it. The couch was old, the cushions sinking in, the places where his body had made a home. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the kind of grease that clings to air long after dinner is gone. "I've never lived with a woman before," he said, standing in the doorway. I had been married before. I knew the way a man's voice sounded when he wanted you to believe something about himself. We met in the middle of our lives, past the age of reckless romance, at the point where love is negotiated rather than surrendered to. He was black, American, from the Midwest. I was not. I had learned over time the quiet rules of crossing borders, of adjusting my accent to fit a new room, of making myself smaller in spaces that did not know how to hold me. He loved me. Or at least he loved the idea of what I might bring to his life. A woman who knew how to care for a body that was beginning to fail. A woman who knew how to press fingers into tense muscles, how to roll socks over swollen ankles, how to whisper, "It's okay, I've got you," when the lights in the emergency room flickered overhead. One time they put a stent in after the heart attack. Common procedure, the doctor said, his voice flat, practiced, as if the body were just another system, a set of valves and pressures, something that could be recalibrated, as if the heart, once broken, could be rewired back to function. And for a time, it worked, until the arrhythmia came, a rhythm thrown off, an electric current gone rogue. They shocked it back into place, a reset, a second chance. I thought about love then, about the body and what it holds, the way a heart once steady could fall out of rhythm, the way something once certain could be shocked back into place but never quite beat the same again, the way love too was an organ, something that worked until it didn't, something that could fail under the weight of expectation. I had spent so long keeping him alive, but no one had been there to do the same for me. And when I finally saw that truth, when I saw the shape of myself disappearing inside of this life, I knew I could not stay. Leaving was not a single moment, but a slow unraveling, a quiet acceptance of what had already been lost. I had believed for so long that love meant staying, but I had come to understand that sometimes love means knowing when to leave. And so I did. The way a heart stumbles out of sync, the way something once steady and sure can misfire. I wondered if love worked that way, if there was a way to jolt it back, to force it to remember its own rhythm, to return it to what it was before the damage. But love, like the body, does not always reset. Sometimes the shocks leave scar tissue, the rhythm never quite the same again. There is a moment when you realize this, when you feel the shape of absence more than presence, when the air itself seems to thin around you. I knew then I could not stay. The weight of what had been and what would never be settled too heavily on my chest. Love had become a language I could no longer translate, the syntax broken, the meaning lost. I thought about the slow erosion of things, How even mountains, given enough time, are worn to nothing by wind and water. How the body too keeps a record of its losses, the echoes of what once was. I had spent years trying to hold on to something that no longer held me. And so I left. There are rules to disappearing. You don't have to learn them. They are already waiting inside you, coiled in muscle memory. First, go somewhere where your name is a sound without history, not just your first name, but the name that tethered you to a past life, the one typed onto lease agreements, called out across a familiar room, stitched into the stories of people you no longer know. A name is a kind of geography, a place you have already been. And if you are not careful, it will call you back. Second, keep your stories vague. Tell people you lived somewhere else, that you were someone else, but never the details. Details give you away. Details make you real. And reality is heavy when you are trying to become light. Third, do not bring everything with you. Leave the letters, the old bills, the photos that prove you existed in a different life. Leave the house with its unmade bed and its half-full closets. Leave the smell of his cologne in the bathroom. Leave the memories that are too sharp to carry. Most importantly, do not look back. If I could unburden myself from the way his voice used to fill a room and then suddenly didn't, life might feel lighter. But lightness is a lie. Absence is never light. It is dense, thick with the shape of someone who used to be there. Freedom is not about leaving. No one leaves clean. No one leaves without carrying the ghosts of the ones who made them, broke them, loved them. He loved me, or he needed me. And maybe that was the same thing. Maybe that is what I told myself. I began again in a city that did not ask questions. It was a place where reinvention was currency, where the past could be rewritten by omission, where I was only the story I chose to tell, the accent I softened, the history I withheld. No one wondered why my body hesitated before taking up space, why my voice drifted between syllables as if searching for a place to land. It was an old instinct, measuring a room before stepping into it, softening my words so they would fit inside another's ears. I had learned over time how to be present without being noticed, how to belong without ever truly being claimed. I dined in diners where waitress called me honey, their voices thick with familiarity as if they had always known me. I wanted to believe in that kind of knowing, the ease of belonging wrapped in a single word. But they did not know the weight of the distances I had crossed, the shifting landscapes of language and expectation, the spaces I had learned to shrink myself into. Still I smiled, letting the warmth of the words settle against my skin, as temporary and fleeting as the moment itself. Earlier, I had watched water move through my life in other ways. The way money flowed between bank accounts, the way my name softened to fit the spaces I entered, the way love, too, had taken and reshaped me. And later, I found myself at the edge of the water, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp sand, the horizon stretching wide and indifferent before me. The tide moved in slow breaths, carrying away fragments of shells, smoothing over footprints as if to erase what had passed. It felt familiar, this undoing, like the careful unspooling of a story, like the silences between sentences, like the way I had learned to let go without leaving a trace. Some places are not meant to be entered, only observed. I watched the waves curl and retreat, leaving behind thin lines of foam that faded almost instantly. Memory is like that, delicate, insistent. It lingers in the salt-heavy air, in the space between the last word spoken and the silence that follows, in the echo of a name said too softly to hold. And always it waits for return, for recognition, for someone to say, "I remember you." But the ocean does not remember, nor does it keep the names of those who have stood before it. It takes what it is given, footsteps, confessions, whispered names, and carries them away. I closed my eyes, letting the wind press against my skin, feeling the salt settle in the strands of my hair. I had spent so much of my life waiting to be known, to be held in the way memory holds a beloved name. But maybe the lesson was in the letting go, in understanding that belonging was not about being claimed, but about choosing to stand fully in the space I occupied. A wave surged, kissed the edges of my toes, then receded. It did not ask who I had been before, did not demand proof of my existence. It simply moved, and I let it. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that I, too, could move without apology, without the need to be held in place by someone else's need. I turned and walked away, leaving no footprints behind. Perhaps this was how one learned to begin again. Not by waiting for recognition, but by learning to be whole even in the absence of it.